Hey guys, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4, and in this video I'll show you how to install our roof rack on a 2nd gen Toyota Sequoia. Alright, so to get started, you're going to want to lay out all your parts, make sure you have everything you need. So we've got front and rear fairings, both side rails, all 9 crossbars, as well as our set of mounts and hardware. So our first step, we're going to get these crossbars installed to the side rails. We'll show you that now. So to get these crossbars installed, things you're going to want to do, first pay attention to these slots that we machine into the crossbar. Those are for your T-nuts. You're just going to want to make sure they're facing up so they're accessible, as well as typically all in the same direction, just for uniformity. After that, to install this to the side rail, you'll take your machined button head bolt with a washer. Go ahead and apply a little bit of anti-seize lubricant to each of these bolts as they go in to prevent corrosion. And you'll place that through this long slot in the side rail and into the crossbar. Now, just for ease of assembly, we typically recommend doing one end or one side rail's worth of crossbars and then switching over to the other side and getting that side rail bolted on. So after you have all those crossbars installed, go ahead and grab your front fairing as well as your edge trim. To get this installed, you're simply going to hold it out. You can measure it if you choose to. Basically point to point here is what you're shooting for. So I'm just going to hold it about at that point, stretch it across, and mark with my thumb. And then I'm just going to cut it right there where I'm holding it with my thumb. For this, I'm just using a pair of tin snips. If you have a tubing cutter or something like that, that would probably work as well. And then there is like an aluminum liner inside of here that's just kind of supposed to help that stay rigid on the edge. If any of that pokes out when you make your cut, just be sure that you peel it out so it doesn't damage your paint or your powder coat. And then after you have that cut to length, just starting from one side at one of these points, you can work one edge up on and then just pressing in all the way across, you can get that edge trim installed. Then after you have the edge trim installed, simply slide the fairing in here between your 2 side rails, and then using the same 1/4 inch hardware that you installed these crossbars with, as well as these flange lock nuts, you can get this thing loosely installed through the 3 side mount holes on each fairing. Then after you have all your fairing hardware loosely installed, go ahead and pick up on your side rails and push this all the way forward. And then you can just lightly snug that in place for now. That just gives it something to rest on when we place this up on the roof. Now for the rear fairing, you're going to need to put some edge trim on this as well. So grab the leftover piece you have from the front and you'll simply cut it roughly in half. Again, paying attention to these little aluminum pieces and pulling them out if necessary. And then once you have 2 equal length pieces, working right here on the inside edges of this, simply starting at this point, you can push your edge trim up on each side. Alright, so we got our mounts laid out here in the correct orientation. Just a couple things you need to know when you go to install these. They're going to have part number cutouts in them. Those go down against the roof, leaving this flange to mount to the side rail on the rack. The larger of the mounts is going to be the front mount. It needs to angle back, as you can see here. The mid mount is going to look very similar to the rear, but it's going to angle back. And then your rear mount angles forward just like that. Now to get these installed, we're going to start with our front mount. So to keep these weather tight, we're just going to be using this Permatex Ultra Black RTV. Basically, we're going to just go make a small ring around each of these bolt holes as well as this center clip hole that's just going to be covered up and sealed by the flange of this bracket. Now on the clip hole, I'm going to make a ring around, but then also kind of bridge over the top of that, just so we know we get a good weather tight seal there. And then with some of that RTV in place, I can take the bracket, line it up over the bolt holes, and then I'm actually going to come back in and fill those holes in with a little bit more RTV, just so that the bolt actually has to pass through that to create a good weather tight seal there as well. With all that in place, just grab your 6mm hardware with a stainless washer and get those started by hand. And once we have both of those started by hand, I'm just going to lightly snug those down while pushing the bracket all the way in to give us as much clearance as possible when we set the rack up here on the roof. Now here on the mid mount, you can see I've already got this one loosely bolted in place, but we're left with one exposed hole that needs to be sealed up. So for that, you're just going to need to remove a clip from your factory rack, put a little bit of RTV around this hole, and snap it in place. After that, I'll get this rear mount installed, and then I'll jump over to the other side and do the same thing with all three of those. Then, after you have all your mounts bolted loosely in place, grab a friend to help you set the rack up on the roof. After you have the rack sitting up here on the roof, you're going to want to grab more 1/4" button head bolts and flange lock nuts and just get those going in place just loosely by hand through these side rails into your mounting brackets. Then, after you have all that hardware loosely installed, you'll come down each side and adjust your side rail height so that you have a nice even gap all the way along that roof line. For that, just know you might have to go back and loosen up those fairings that we tightened earlier. Then, once you're happy with that side rail profile, you can come back and tighten up all those side rail mounting bolts. And after those are tight, you can come back in from the top and tighten your mounting brackets to the roof. Next, you can position your front as well as your rear fairing. To do that, the first thing we're going to recommend is that you pick up some of this paint protective film. This is just a clear vinyl type film that you're going to put down right underneath this edge trim anywhere that it makes contact with the paint, and that's just going to prevent any dust and dirt and debris, things like that that might get under there over time, from scratching up your painted surface. After you have that in place, the only thing you need to do with these is push it down so it's nice and tight against the roof, and then tighten up the side bolts. Now with those tight, you can go ahead and do the same thing in the rear, just using a couple short pieces of that protective film underneath your edge trim, and that'll complete your install. If you guys have any questions about this roof rack or any other product here at Victory 4x4, feel free to reach out to us, info@victory4x4.com, or give us a call, 269-459-8447.